it mean to be a good friend? To me, what it means to be a good friend, one, I'm willing to do things for you that I'm not willing to do for other people. What true friendship is like telling someone the truth, telling them a hard truth, telling them that they have shit in their teeth, even if it's, hard to hear, because I want you to get better.
I think that Christianity is one of those things that it's your own culture. And so if you grew up in it, understanding some of the beauty of that message is really, really difficult. And are they excited about the future? Are they afraid of the future? What do you think?
They're not thinking about the future at all. So probably afraid of what they don't understand. But no, there's no thought. And it shows by their actions. It's like you're not doing anything to move yourself forward.
I am Caleb Dinsey, a precision ag specialist living in Aurora, South Dakota, and you are listening to the Vance Crow Podcast.
Welcome back to the podcast. I'm glad you're here. Today, we sit down with Jack Milliken, the producer of the Vance Crow Podcast. I met Jack shortly after he turned 21. He was a college dropout with a charismatic smile and was so good at asking questions that I actually tried to hire him to work for Legacy Interviews. Instead, Jack started a company that helps people publish podcasts, and what started out as a single client has grown into the largest podcast publishing company in St. Louis. I sat down with Jack to talk about what it's like to be a fit 25-year-old growing a company in 2024. We talked about what young men are being told by modern culture, who has influenced him, and what the dating world is like. We're going to get to that interview in just a moment, but first, I wanted to talk about an opportunity that is just for you. Last year, a client hired me and the Legacy Interviews team to come to his childhood home during harvest season. There, we captured the life stories of 6 individuals and couples from his family and operation. Recording these stories illuminated not only family stories, but the history of something bigger than all of them, the farm. This is something that they will pass down to great-grandkids. Harvest season is the perfect time to record your family stories and capture footage of your equipment and farm. In less than a decade, your family will be grateful that you created a priceless family heirloom. If you're interested in this special service, go to legacyinterviews.com and hit the contact page so you and I can discuss how we can bring Legacy Interviews to your farm this harvest season. All right, without further ado, let's get to the interview with Jack Milliken. Jack Milliken, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Vance.
So you are a 25-year-old fit guy that runs his own company. How is dating life like?
Yeah, it's there's like 2 avenues, I guess, for it. You have the online and you have the in-person, and I have a preference towards the in-person. But if you're paying attention to like a lot of the messaging right now, you would probably say it's terrible and like hopeless, especially for young men. But I don't really agree with that. I think if like you get in shape and you're charismatic and working on yourself, dating's not difficult. It's just a numbers game.
What do you mean a numbers game?
It's just like sales. It's like, if your batting average in baseball, if you have a 300 and you hit 3 out of 10, you're like an excellent, baseball player. But there's a ton of different types of people out there, and there's a ton of different messages being told to each, like men and women. And so you're going to get like a really diverse grouping of potential mates. And if you know what you're looking for, then I'm going to have to go through a lot of different dates with women to like finally be like, oh, this woman fits the archetype of what I'm looking for.
What do you think the messaging is that most guys your age are being told?
I think most guys my age are being told, be emotionally available, the old way of thinking as far as like what a romantic relationship looks like is toxic. And like we need to do better is really, I think it's really negative.
What do you mean? Like, so you're saying things that seem so foreign to me. Mm-hmm. So like when you say the old ways of dating are toxic, what does that mean?
Yeah, like even holding a door open for a woman, like these things are like, all of these old ways of chivalry we're being told, this is like not the way to do it. I can open the door for myself is, what like the women are being told, right? And so I think there's just a lot of confusing messaging of like, well, so how
what
do
are
I
the
be
norms?
chivalrous?
How should I behave to show her I'm interested and I'm willing to make sacrifices to demonstrate to her that I'm like there for her?
Right, 100%.
And what messages do you think women are hearing?
Women are hearing focus on your career, like that is what's going to fulfill you, and you don't need a man, and you don't need someone to protect you. You can protect yourself, and you know, don't start dating seriously until you're in your 30s, or it's like focus on yourself for a while. That's what I think they're being told.
And so when you hear these different kinds of messages, how do they resonate with you?
I'm very, very traditional, like extremely traditional, and I just like look at the relationships that I want to one day have, like my parents or my uncle and my aunt, like these relationships, and I just look and follow what they are, and they're very traditional. Like the man is the man, and the woman is the woman, and everyone has a role, and no one role is better or worse than the other. But like, this is how it's operated, and this is why our machine is working. Our family is like doing well.
And how do you think the women that you're going on dates with, how do they respond to that?
It depends, like which ones you're going on. Like I think if you're finding like a more conservative Christian woman, then like they respond well to that message, and that's what they're looking for. If you're going on with more generally like liberal and progressive women, then that's just not what I'm looking for. So like if I'm going on a date with them, that's not going to be something serious in my mind.
So how are you introduced to the women you're going on dates with?
I'm extremely social, and so like if I'm at a coffee shop, I go to the same coffee shop every day. I'm meeting women there, or just creative ways. Like, so I used to have a dating show that I think I've told you about this, but we had a dating show. It was a double dating show, and I'd either message girls on dating apps or like meet them out in public at a bar and be like, hey, do you want to come on this show where we go on dates with women and 2 girls and 2 guys, and it's like who can be more compatible or whatever it was, with my buddy who was a comedian and he was the host, and like that was one way that I would meet girls, but yeah, mostly like out in public and build a rapport with them. I don't really ask girls like cold approach first time, hey, you want to go on a date? Like I like to talk with them and interact with them on a few occasions, and like to where we're both comfortable with each other, and yeah.
You use dating apps?
I have them. I've actually never been on an actual date from a dating app, but I have it. It's more of like an ego thing, I think, than anything else.
What do you mean?
Like how many beautiful women are interested in me, and like this is like a real way to quantify that. Oh, this, I have 20 beautiful women that are messaging me. That just builds your ego up and boosts it up really well. And that can also, on the opposite end of that, I think it like really hurts a lot of people's confidence being on there.
Because they're sitting there saying, yes, I would match with you, but nobody's matching back with them.
Yep. That's much, much more so for young men than women. Like men, they're saying yes to all kinds of potential options, but women, they have, if you imagine, like if you have 100 people saying they are interested in you, well, you're only gonna maybe only find 10 of them attractive, so there's 90 other guys that are being left out. There's just a total mismatch of interest on dating apps.
I would imagine that if you're in the male group, whatever, the top of the Pareto distribution, the 20% that's getting 80% of the attention, that a dating app could become like a drug for you, that it would be able to just suck you in, and you could just be like new experience as much as possible.
100%.
What do you think that does to the people you've seen have engage in that way?
The ones that have had success on there? Or
yeah.
The ones? I even notice it with myself, like, these potential matches just become numbers in a way, like just a quick hit of dopamine, and then like that's it. Does it devalue the way you look at other human beings? Maybe, because it's like first glance, like, is this person attractive? Swipe right or left. Right being yes, I like them. Left being no, I don't like them. Yeah, I actually do think it will add to like devaluing other people and like just putting them as like a quick flash of the pan thing of whether they have value to me or not.
I think for me, I was like maybe 6 months before I got married is when dating apps became a big deal.
Okay.
And I think it would have radically changed my life because it would have been algorithms telling you who to meet and how you're getting connected. And there is virtually no chance that the apps would have put me and my wife together. And I'm thinking even more of like the eHarmony, whatever, like matching on your dating profile, let alone like would we have collided based on like, do we both find each other attractive? Like, no chance that that relationship would have occurred based on algorithms.
How did you guys meet?
A blind date. So it was like a person that she knew and a person that I kind of knew said, "Oh, you ought to go on a date with this beautiful woman. I think you two would be a good match." And like, there's no way on paper we would, she was an aerospace engineer and like a hardcore athlete, and I was a Peace Corps volunteer that worked at the World Bank. Like very, very different people, different like interests that we would have written down. She had just competed in an Ironman, and that would not have been something I'd have been interested in doing. And like, there's just no way. And so it took like human intuition to find that match, I think.
It took human. Do you think that most like relationships, if you on paper, don't work?
I don't know. I mean, like my parents are another example that like likely would never have been matched together that worked really well. But I mean, I know quite a few people that are married now because they found each other through algorithms. I don't think there's anything wrong with that.
Mm-hmm.
I just think it is a bizarro kind of Gattaca-like world when, the algorithms are what are choosing our, breeding selections.
Yeah, totally. And I think circling back a little bit, but like I think the issue with algorithms and the issue with these online dating things is like it takes away the initial like risk that it takes for a guy to go up to a girl. When you have that online interaction first of messaging a little bit first and then we go on a date, it's like, okay, you just padded that potentially really hard blow of getting denied right off the bat. And I think there's like an inherent sense of recognizing that in the men and in the women of like this interaction, this relationship did not start off with risk. It started off with
we at least knew the barrier was down.
Uh-huh.
Like we at least put our card up that said, yes, I'm open. Whereas in the world pre-digital, like, the most signal you had from a woman would be like, does she make eye contact with you?
Yeah.
And even then you could be like, am I reading this thing wrong? Am I not? Like,
I have the really unfortunate delusion of like any woman that looks at me is interested in me, which is pretty funny. But
I think that's actually most people. I mean, I think there's like an evolutionary, like positive thing to have you believe, yeah, this has a potential to go somewhere, right? Like better that you have confidence that you'll go and make more attempts than no, she probably wasn't looking at me, right? That's he who hesitates and you'd be left along the side of the road. Right?
yeah,
Like,
yeah, that's right.
and so, like, how long into dating have you gone? Like, have you dated somebody for a long period of time?
No, I've never had a serious relationship. I've never dated someone for a long period of time.
What's the longest you've dated somebody for?
Maybe like a month.
Wow. And you're 25.
Mm-hmm.
Does that feel like you're behind?
Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. Like I am extremely particular in who I want to have a relationship with, and I feel pretty confident in being picky right now just because I'm on an upward trajectory in my life, and like I as a human being am only going to get better, I'd like to think. And I've also noticed that I interact really, really well with like 30-year-old women and 32-year-old women, and like there would be a genuine romantic connection there if I pursued it. So I'd like to think that just I get along with more mature women, and so as I get older, like that number goes up. For my
What do you
potential.
think the difference is between a 25-year-old woman like yourself and a 30-year-old woman?
I'm debating in my mind whether it's simply time, like just experience in life, or if it is even in that 5-year gap, there's been less of a messaging punched into these women.
Oh, that it's just that there's a different culture. They come from
Different culture. Yeah. Less confusing messaging maybe 5 years ago for women that are that age. That could be it. I really don't know.
I think there's something that humbling that happens to really anybody that's beautiful, but I think for a lot of women, where from the age of 18 to I don't know when, but they go up to the bar and the bartender stops talking to whoever they were and focuses on them and gives them attention and says, "What do you want to drink?" And other people give them attention. And that goes like a rocket for a long time until all of a sudden it doesn't. And your experience of the world in that way would be that everyone is nice, everyone gets to the head of the line, and then all of a sudden you're dealing with the world where things aren't as easy for you. And like all of a sudden you either look around and say the world is changing, or you say like, what happened to me? And the deflation that must be catastrophic, I think, in a lot of people's minds.
Well, I think catastrophic is a good way to put it. And like, I think that also the world is changing, and damn the world is wrong for what it has done to me now, not with like the inability to reflect on why you were getting these things. I think pretty privilege is like vastly underestimated.
Pretty privilege, so it has a name.
Pretty privilege, yeah.
Okay.
I don't think people recognize, like when we talk about privilege in the world, pretty privilege is probably amongst the top privileges you could have.
Yeah, and like you would never even, it would be completely indistinguishable from the rest of reality if you have it, because, and that's what privilege is, right? It's an advantage that you can't even see in yourself. And I wonder like how that then changes relationships. And, you know, I know for me when I was younger, I was told when I was in college, like the biological clock, that's a myth. Like that's not real.
You were told that?
Oh yeah,
By
absolutely.
everyone?
Oh yeah. Particularly when you got to college, you're like, this is just I mean, I don't know that people were sitting me down and saying that's a myth. They were just like, this isn't real. You know, you should pursue your career. So a lot of the things that you're talking about, we were definitely told, and I bought hook, line, and sinker, right? Like I was in no hurry to get married. In fact, the only reason I got married was because when I met Ann, I was like, there is no one of this caliber that is ever going to find me interesting. Like I'm like batting way out of my league, so I'm going to marry this woman. But like if you had asked me, you know, right before I met Ann, how many more years until you get married? I'd have said 5 or 10 years. And then on top of that, after we got married, we were like, we should be pursuing our careers. We should be traveling. We should be getting everything set, not realizing like, no, there is a very like serious reality about time, and you may not get pregnant as early or as easily as you think. And so we waited a long time, and then things weren't easy. And that was my like coming crashing into reality, where all of a sudden you're staring out at a world where you say, I had never thought about whether I really wanted to have children, or I'd kind of put off that thinking. I just didn't put myself in that position. And now all of a sudden you're faced with but what will my life be if I don't have children, if I can't? You know, will I stay with this woman? Am I like morally obligated to try and find somebody that could have children with me? Is it her? Is it me? Could she leave me to try and go have a child? You know, like, and what will this mean for our lives? And that was something that I feel like anybody that was telling me that I was not listening, but that most of the messages in our culture were the opposite of that. So I see your age right now, where as wild as somebody like Andrew Tate might be, or as like, you know, grating as some of these other people are, they are telling you something that was not told in my age.
I'm like really grateful that I came across Andrew Tate. Like honestly,
wow.
Yeah. He's probably the reason that Benjamin and I like formed our Perium group, or the reason that I at least initiated towards that. I think there's this what's called the red pill movement right now. Are you familiar with it?
Well, go ahead and describe it.
It's basically like you know, in the Matrix, you can take the blue pill and like stay in reality, or stay in this, you know, facade, or you can take the red pill and jump into reality. And so this movement, that's the red pill movement, is talking to men, basically saying like, here are the dating dynamics and the men and women intersexual dynamics that you have been told all your life, and we're breaking those down. And one of those is like, you can't negotiate desire. And what that means is you might watch a Disney movie, or you might watch like a show like Friends, and like the guy's like, well, we would make a really good match. Like, why don't we? And maybe if I do all these nice things for this girl, then she'll be attracted and desire me. And the red pill movement kind of came in and was like, well, no, like you can't negotiate that. It's either you're desirable or you're not. That's like the main message that at least I took away from it. And so, yeah, I'm grateful that I came across that, because I was like totally bought into that way of thinking.
Yeah, I probably was myself as well. Like just the like, I mean, I wasn't getting run over, but I was definitely the nice guy. I was definitely trying to be, if somebody wasn't that interested in me, thinking about like, what is the grand date that I could take this person on that might change their mind?
Yes.
And, fortunately for me, like the path just worked out. But I could imagine that if you are not being successful and you keep thinking, I'm just going to nice guy harder, as opposed to I'm going to go become somebody that a woman would be attracted to, you could get really stuck in a vortex until the world passes you by.
Yeah, 100%. And I think like a good healthy balance of looking at that is like, okay, the nice guy, when you say the nice guy finishes last, it's like, well, if you dig a little deeper into that, it's the person that doesn't set boundaries finishes last, right? Like, I think that there's a really healthy way of looking at that, and the asshole gets the girl, right? We all look at like the bad boy getting the girl. But it's really, it's at the core of that, it's if you have principles that you stick to, then you're going to come off as an asshole sometimes, but...
Well, that's the very thing that you said before about like, the asshole thinks every girl is trying to give him attention and goes ahead and asks her out on a date, and he might be wrong, 7 out of 10 times, but if he takes that many more at-bats, he's going to do a lot better than the person that's like, I don't know, she probably wasn't talking to me. What do I have to offer here? So, I mean, it totally makes sense why the person that is more confident or at least more aggressive they're going to get more at-bats and they're going to get more hits.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so when you talk to women of your age group, are they satisfied with where the dating world is? Are they are things good for them? What do you interpret as going on with women your age?
Yeah, no, I don't. I think that they look at that in a very cynical way of like, back to the idea of like the messaging being confusing. A lot of these women that I talk to personally are like, these guys are asking to go 50-50 split payment on the first date, or they're just like weak men, or they're not strong, but they don't know how to articulate it in that way. It's moreover like just a feeling of like these guys are just like not up to scratch.
I just want to be friends, but they don't actually like clarify down why is it that they're not attracted to them as a partner.
Right.
And if they're not able to articulate it, how well do they understand it? And so they're just hit with a barrage of over and over again going on dates with people that either just not interested in or like really don't match them. And so then they end up saying, well, maybe I'll settle. Mm-hmm. Or maybe I should focus on my career or life or
focus on my career or whatever. Yeah, the settling part really is like, and both men and women, it's just really terrifying to me. Like, I have people that I'm very close with that like I've seen like, oh, you settled for that person, and like that is one of the core fears that I have of like being a person that this woman settled for. And I think about that and I'm like, that is not what I want at all. Yeah.
Yeah, that would be a horrifying thing, right? Like to be that. On the other hand, even if you're not the person that they settled for, like the reality of life is, do you become the man that they were hoping that you would become? And that is a bar that's, one that you want a woman that will have a high bar for you, but not one that the bar is so high that you can't attain it. And the reality of life is there are going to be times when you are not achieving that level. Like you are not good enough. And how patient is this person? And how much are they like, hey, I said till death do you part and I mean it. Because to me, that actually, in the marriage vows, when you're taking them, you don't really have any idea just how much those things could be tested. And not because either of you are doing anything wrong, but because like life gets hard, right? Like my wife and I are very, very close. For for 8 years, we didn't have any children. And in that, we had all kinds of good things happen and tough things and things you got through. But it isn't until you've both been up for 72 hours and it's 3 a.m. and she's so tired she can't stay awake, but you have responsibilities the next day and you have this fight and you're both being irrational, that the next day you come back and there's not a question of are we going to leave or not, because the vow, if you find a person that takes that vow really, really seriously, it allows you both to like pull on that chain so much more than you ever could have imagined, because every experience you had leading up to that while you're dating is not that, it never requires that level of pulling. And so it's so funny because you take vows that you couldn't possibly understand, or I couldn't possibly have understood when you're taking them, and then they become really important at 3 a.m. 12 years later.
I think nowadays, like for younger people, marriage and those vows is like more just like marriage is the new dating almost. Like, and I think we have the statistics to say that of like what 50% of marriages end in divorce.
That statistic is a little bit weird though, because it actually factors in people that have been married 2, 3, 4 times, and the odds that if you get divorced once, the odds that you'll get divorced again are a lot higher. So what I see is that people just aren't getting married. I saw some crazy statistics. I mean, it's like, more than half of women over the age of 40, I think, are unmarried and don't have children, right? And so they are unlikely to get married. And even if they do get married, they won't have children. This is something that has just not happened in the history of civilization. And I think a lot of that comes to them not wanting to settle or thinking something better is going to come along, and then getting to a point where like you talked about, the pretty privilege, like where they aren't necessarily the person that people are like, oh, she's, interesting and new and excited about life, because of, all of us, men and women in their mid-30s, all of a sudden you start realizing like, oh wait, the good guy doesn't always win. Oh wait, you don't always get the right thing happening, and that wears on you. And somebody that's young and impressionable doesn't have all those life scars. Yeah,
totally. And what you said about the like settling, or it's so much easier for women to be like afraid of settling now, because they have this social media has just like opened up this guy has this experience. I could be on a boat somewhere in Dubai or whatever. Like they have all of these opportunities or experiences that they're looking at that they could have, with all of these different men. And the other thing too with like dating apps and social media is it used to be like if there was a girl in a small town and she was the prettiest girl in the small town, well, she'll just find, the best guy in that small town. Now the prettiest girl in that town is getting messaged from a prince in Dubai saying, come out here and, let's hang out at my penthouse and on my boat.
And is that real, or is that just something, I see it.
100% real. Yeah, 100% real. Like, if you go on these dating apps, the most, traditionally beautiful women or boob jobs or whatever, right, lip jobs, all this stuff, like they'll put in their bio, like take me on your boat, or like they're signaling I'm looking for someone with money. And they're signaling that because it works, because they're actually getting these opportunities.
Yeah, I have to wonder if it's in part social media, and then this comes back to my belief that the root cause of many, many of our problems, if not almost all of them, is inflation. And that when I was in Kenya, I saw that a lot of young women that were living in these villages would pick up sugar daddies. And the reason that they did was they needed somebody to compensate their income in order for them to be able to live, in order for them to be able to like make it in the world. And I think it was harder for families to be able to support their children into later ages. They weren't getting married until later. And so I think that is a cultural thing that is happening to us. I think that the value of the dollar isn't going as far. I think people are definitely being told that there is way more upside to being fabulously wealthy with toys and trinkets and traveling and things. But I also think that there isn't as much stability in being married as there once was, and so people are seeking out that stability in other paths.
That's interesting. I don't know if I would agree with that. Like, I look around and, more women are going to college than ever before, and more women are getting into careers than ever before.
Yeah, but think about what that did to the economy, right? So what that did was it doubled the workforce, but it did not double wages. In fact, it increased the amount of people competing for jobs, and so it actually drove down the value of labor.
Okay.
By 50%, right? Because we genuinely, if it was mostly just men working and doing legacy interviews, I hear a lot more young women worked than what we kind of have the impression of.
That's
Most of them were secretaries or teachers or nurses, but a lot of them worked for the first few years that they're born, or when they're adults. But a big thing happened to our economy was that we increased the labor supply so much, but we didn't. It proliferated out. All of a sudden, now you have two incomes, but we didn't increase the amount that people were being paid. In fact, the government started printing money and taking away the value of those hours that you were putting there. So now it is very, very difficult for a one-family income to be able to work, and two people have to work now.
That's interesting. I think that could be the case. I still think it's more so around like the status of it and like being able to signal that if you want a sugar daddy, you're giving yourself the ability to signal that you have these experiences that other people can't attain. And so like I was in the Big Brother program, for instance, and my little brother, he had a really solid family. His dad was in prison, but he had financial support. He was going to a good private Catholic high school. Just doing well, but he was selling drugs also. And I'm like, well, why are you selling drugs? And he goes, well, I need the money. And it's like, you're 15 years old. At this point in time, you do not need this money. This is like a sexy thing to you. You feel really cool and dangerous when you're selling drugs. And like, I know that's why you're doing it. You're not doing it because you need money. You have Gucci belts and you have an Xbox and you have all these things that money could bring you. And I think that's probably the same with like women that are like seeking sugar daddies. I don't think that they're the lifestyle that they want is requiring a sugar daddy, and the lifestyle that they want is because they see it so much on social media. Like,
maybe. I mean, I don't know. Like, I think that that's entirely possible and could be a large explanation of a big part of it. But I think that what is happening is people are entering that age of sexual maturity and they're looking out at their options. And whereas it used to be, because I have hundreds of people have sat in the chair that you're at, where the husband was going to be able to contribute, let's say 70% or, 80% of what the income of what the family would need. So a woman marrying him could see the future in that. She could see there is stability here. There is a future. This is a future that I understand. It's coherent to me. Whereas now that's not the case. And it may be that we're looking at women and we're saying, you're taking the easy way out. And, if you're doing OnlyFans or you're becoming essentially an escort, that may be that. But I think that there is a lot more going on there that's underneath the surface that has to do with the fact that human labor, the value of it, has been stolen by our government, and people will always seek to find the highest likelihood that they think that they can get stability, that they can have a life where they can be predictable. And I also understand that when you're in your 20s, you're not thinking forward that one day you'll be 45 and things will be more difficult. But I don't think people have changed so much that they don't want stability. I think that's what people are seeking, almost all of them.
The sugar daddy thing is interesting to me because it's like I think these women because I know multiple women that have sugar daddies, and like I don't think that they see like this as like a future forever.
Well, in Kenya, what they do it for, and I don't know, like I could not honestly say I know any women with sugar daddies in the U.S. But when I was in Kenya, I knew, and they were doing it because, hey, this is a way for me to get an education, so that way I can get a job, and that way this other thing can happen. But they weren't. They knew that the sugar daddy had like a some kind of a timeline. They weren't expecting them to marry him, but it was an effort, a path to be
Gotcha.
able to get where they needed to go.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense to me. They had I totally agree with you on like the projection of what stability looks like in the future is like the most up in the air that maybe it's ever been.
Yeah, that's actually a great question. What do you think the world will look like in 5 years?
Gosh, I don't even know the answer. I don't even know what I could say to that. Like, I just know that I will be doing well. Like, that's I can almost have to take like a really solipsistic approach to it, and like I'm gonna be doing fine, and like that's all I can really wrap my mind around.
Because you're confident in your workability and your...
Yep. And that's why I'm very cynical in this regard, but like I look at the fact that these women can't see stability in male partners, and I'm like, I guess everyone can't be an entrepreneur, but like if you just work as hard as you possibly can, develop a skill, project into the future, have savings, you'll be okay. I don't. And I'd be curious what you have to say about this, because I know the government definitely plays a hand in like the inflation and raising that, right? But at the same time, no one my age knows how to save money for the future. Like, they're not even planning for it. They don't even, and if that would at least be some padding to inflation and understanding how to properly use your money. But we aren't taught that, and we aren't worried about that.
Well, when you think about saving to protect yourself against inflation or whatever, what does that mean to you?
Yeah, and to me, I think it's unique in like my version of saving for the future is developing skills right now that are needed by other people, and that potentially could always be needed by other people. But I guess like maybe like a more general view of it for most people around my age is like, well, you're putting your money into a 401k and you're putting your money into Roth IRAs and like these generic kind of understandings of it. But yeah, that's...
Yeah, I mean, my belief is that like, with the economy, certainly savings, where you're like going to a bank and you're putting it in a savings account, is essentially worthless. Your money will be worth less
Right.
than it is that you're putting in. But even the stock market, right? Like, this is being heavily manipulated, and not just in terms of the way that the government keeps printing money, but it also has to do with the way that corporations are so incentivized by the government. So if you're a large corporation, one of your largest clients, I'll take Monsanto for example, which doesn't exist anymore, but one of their largest clients was the U.S. government. And so they were always going to do whatever the U.S. government wanted them to do, because the U.S. government bought glyphosate from them and used it on all of the train tracks in the United States, or all around, different utility stations or government facilities, right? So there's no one single buyer that would ever come along that would be more important than the U.S. government. So what that means is all of the ways that they view corporate, if the government wants you to have some kind of corporate opinion about something, you're going to have that opinion. And when the government eventually runs out of their ability to buy things with either taxpayer money or printed money, many of those corporations are going to fall because their largest purchaser is the government. And so if you're putting your money into 401ks and you're trying to set yourself up in this way, right now it's one of the best options you have, but that can collapse way faster than I think most people realize. I'm not trying to be a doomer here, but I think that most people don't realize that many, if not most large corporations, their largest client is the government.
And so is the solution libertarianism, in the sense of like, or making something to where the government isn't allowed to purchase?
Well, I
these
think
things
that
from
the first thing that you described is really important. Like, your skill set is the thing that will matter, and finding as close to a job that exists whether or not the economy is good or not. So funeral homes, housing, trash, any of the things that you're like, this will definitely be around. But I don't think the world is only going to be made up of those things, right? People have other desires, and there'll be coincidences of want that'll be different than just, the bare minimum. You've heard me talk a lot about Bitcoin, but this is a key thing that we can see now, like after the last 4 years. I remember, so I was talking about Bitcoin 8 years ago, 10 years ago. And when I would talk about inflation, people would laugh at me. They would be like, we have to have inflation. We have to have 2% inflation. Otherwise, how could the economy grow? And then my whole position was always like, one, it's never 2.5% or whatever they're telling you. It's much worse than that. And once it starts rolling, once it starts going, there's no way to pull it back. So all of the things that you hear about in the news about like, oh, we're going to be able to get a soft landing, oh, we're going to be able to bring that down, is not true. Because,
why is that?
Well, because right now, the way that they have tried to slow down inflation is that they've increased the amount that it costs to borrow money. So the interest rates, right? They artificially move that up. It's not what is the market saying it is. It's basically the Federal Reserve saying, we'll loan you guys money, but we're going to loan it out to you at this rate. The problem is the U.S. government has so much debt, but they have to pay the same interest on that debt. And so the amount of, so 75% of all of the federal income taxes that were collected this year went towards just paying this year's interest on that debt. And it's going faster and faster and faster. And the credit card, like the amount that people are paying, when somebody gets behind in their credit cards, just imagine that at the $1 trillion level, right? You just can't keep up with it. And so now they're in a position like if they drop the interest rates, well, then that means they're shoving more money into the system, which means that you have inflation because there's more dollars going after the same amount of goods. So then if they raise that interest rate, now all of a sudden they have such high interest rate payments that they can't keep up with it. So they're in this vicious cycle of which me and people of my tribe would say is not possible to get out of.
And Bitcoin is a potential way of like fixing that?
It's a way of having an asset that you can store value in. So
is it like so would you say like it's a restart almost? Like we can't fix the inflation that we have now, but we can start using Bitcoin as much as possible to eventually replace that?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think what I would say, whether it's a replacement or whether it's just like a side chain, whatever you want to call it, what it does is it allows you to store value in something that can't be replicated. It can't be produced in mass. And we just don't have that. Even the stock market right now, right? Like if you buy, NVIDIA or, Alphabet or Apple, they can go out and print more stocks. You don't have any choice in that, right? There can almost everything that you can own as an asset can be printed infinitely. There's a couple things that can't, right? Your house, farmland can't be printed. There's a few things that are very, very tangible that once you own it, then if the amount of dollars to buy it goes up, you're floating with that. But Bitcoin is one of those rare things because what they did was they created digital scarcity. You created something that you can say, well, it's digital, but it can't be replicated infinitely, so I can own this thing, and someday in the future, other people might say, well, and they already do right now, they're willing to pay, whatever it is, $66,000 for one Bitcoin. And, that's going to float for a long time, but it's a way that you can store value a lot more likely than you can if you had it in US dollars.
And why can't it be replicated infinitely?
Well, the way the code is written, it's that if you want to transact on the miners that I'm using or the system that I'm using, you have to agree that the code says 21 million. And if you're somebody that comes in and says, well, I want the code to say 22 million, well, that's fine. But everyone else that's running the code that says 21 million will just say, well, Jack's Bitcoins don't count. We're not using that in this system.
Okay. All right. That's interesting.
So for me, I guess how we got here, that we won't avoid the fall of the system. And I have no idea. Does the fall of the system happen in 10 years or 20 years or tomorrow? I don't know. But when I think about being 25 years old and having like a look out at this world, I guess I'm probably thinking, I hope it comes sooner rather than later so we can start rebuilding faster, as opposed to waiting until you're in your middle age and have it collapse, where all those things that you've built collapse and you have to restart.
I'm probably in the latter of that, of like, I hope it comes later just so I could have, I've acquired wealth, land, and cattle. It's like what I'm trying to work towards right now.
Is that your aspiration? Mm-hmm. And the land, does it matter where that land is?
Preferably in Missouri somewhere. Yeah. but yeah.
And why cattle?
Just cattle is like seems recession proof, and it seems like proof of all of these things. If it came down to it, I need land, shelter, and food. So it's kind of a doomsday approach, I suppose, but cattle can be an asset that I can sell. And so my uncle, he was very wealthy, and he passed away a while ago. But he was kind of a doomsday prepper in a sense, and I recognized that when I'm like, oh, he invested heavily in land, ammunition, and guns, and cattle. And it just made sense to me of like, oh yeah, if the value of the dollar were to drop to zero tomorrow and there was a zombie apocalypse, what would I need? I would need food,
those things,
food
and cattle puts you at the top of the food chain. There was a time when our food system was very different than it is now, and people had the idea of keeping pigs, right? Pigs are actually kind of hard to keep, but like people would keep them in their pastures, and chickens as well. Now we have such a vertically integrated system. Like, do you know any pig farmers?
No.
Guaranteed there's guys right now scooping shit in a pig barn right now listening to this. But there used to be that people, even if they had cattle, they'd say, oh, we have a milking cow or two, we have some beef cattle, we have pigs in our pasture, and they had this like collection. So I think it's very interesting that your model is, I want beef cattle. It's great. There's no criticism there. It's just an interesting thing that it's just modeled after what is today. Because really, cattle is one of the only systems that people have that are still sovereign, because pork and chicken and eggs are all very, very vertically integrated. So people can have like their backyard chickens, but you don't see very many like, I'm providing chickens for me and 10 of my neighbors, the way that it was more frequently done in the past.
Gotcha.
You mentioned earlier our shared friend Benjamin Anderson, and when I talked to him about having you on the podcast, I said, what should we talk about? And he said, ask Jack about what it means to be a good friend. So I thought that was a good question for you.
What does it mean to be a good friend? To me, what it means to be a good friend is like, one, I'm willing to do things for you that I'm not willing to do for other people. That's like really important to me, actually, I realized in a friendship. Otherwise, it feels like we're just acquaintances. It means I think what true friendship is like telling someone the truth, telling them a hard truth, telling them that they have shit in their teeth. Even if it's hard to hear, because I want you to get better. Like an example of a friendship that I have that has gone downhill is one where it's all about positive. We can't tell each other the truth. We have to he thinks that we're really good friends because we say so many positive things about each other. And like that's like a...
Seems like it'd have to be more nuanced than that. Like you didn't not become friends because he's
totally,
really positive.
Totally. That's just, it's absolutely more nuanced than that. But yeah, I would say like I want you to be better, and so like I'm gonna do what feels right to me of like what makes you a better person, and you tell me the truth and I tell you the truth.
I read something not that long ago about people in your age bracket, but as you get older it gets worse, saying they have like, not even two people that they would call their good friends. Is that really true? That's going on in the world, that young men don't have good friends?
Yeah, I would say absolutely. Like either they're drinking buddies or they're people that don't have friends, or maybe they have just people that are online friends. I think there's like a really large part of the world of young men that we don't even see or hear from or know anything about because they are sitting inside, they're playing video games, and they're talking to people online. I think it's absolutely true.
It seems it's very difficult for me to like comprehend that, right? Like I've had friends since I was in kindergarten, and certainly you cycle through friends. You have some friends that you stay with, but like to imagine a life where you couldn't say I have two good friends is like mind-bending. But I was in an Uber not that long ago. I was giving a talk in Tennessee, and my Uber driver was asking me about back home, and I mentioned my friends, and he brought up, he was like, that's the reason I became an Uber driver, was to make friends, because I don't have any friends. And I was like, wow. And he was like, what advice, because I was like, I struggle to imagine that. And he said, well, what advice would you have? And I'm like, I don't even know.
Yeah.
That's so basic to the human existence that it's hard for me to imagine what would you do. However, I remember I lived in Denver for a period of time where the guy that I moved there with, we bought a house and we were renovating it together, and he would leave for a few weeks at a time, and I didn't really have friends there. And it's hard to break in to make friends, but you figure it out and you do it.
Yeah, I struggle with that one too because I'm so social that like if I were to go to another city right now, I could go in and find a friend group. You go to a run club and then you show up consistently and then you invite someone out for a drink or something. It seems really intuitive, I think, especially to people that are like extroverted like us. Yeah, I it's hard. That's tricky. Like
when you get older, the challenge becomes, if I am going to sacrifice in order to be able to make time for this friend, the sacrifice either comes out of my work or out of my family.
Yeah.
And that becomes really difficult. And for somebody like me that had such a rich set of friends all the way well into my 30s, now all of a sudden to be like, I haven't gone out and seen my friends, in a long time, that was pretty tough. The only way around that for me was to set up I have Thursday night. That is my night to see my friends. That's my wife treats that as like sacred. That's just what I do. But without that, I would go a long period of time without seeing my friends, and that's just the price you pay when you have a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old.
Yeah, if you had no friends right now with 2 children and a wife, how would you go out and try to make friends?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I have the benefit of this podcast. So, this podcast is a gravity well, and people reach out to me, and they know a lot about me, and they often share a lot. I have a good friend named Jay, who just the other day got in his airplane and recorded him talking to me while his plane was taking off and flying around in the air and then coming back. So, with the podcast, I get that. Without the podcast, I don't know what I would do. Start a podcast? I don't know.
Podcasts are like such a cheat code for life. I realized when I started mine.
Yeah, tell me more.
Like I would start a podcast, and for instance, I brought a psychologist on and told them all my problems. I just got a psychology session for free, right? I could talk to there was a business owner that I respected, and he was a millionaire, and maybe he would have gone down and just had a coffee with me, but he had a reason, instead I invited him onto my podcast, and he had a reason to really come on and talk about it. So it's like you said, a gravity well that you can just create of anything that you want.
Yeah, and there's something else about the podcast. It's not just the fact that you have it, which is what I used to think. I was like, I have this thing, but there's something about it, and it's a concept that comes from Bitcoin that I really like called proof of work. And it's a fit body is proof of work that you work out, right? And having a podcast is proof of work that somebody thought that it was worthwhile to have conversations with you, right? You have a list of these conversations and you want me to be among them. There's some kind of evidence. And proof of work is one of those things that it's been a great concept for me to for me when things aren't going right, and I'm like, oh, that's not fair. I wish that was different. I always look around and where's your proof of work, right? Where is the thing that you did that tells you should have this thing? And 99 times out of 100, it's the proof of work is lacking, not that the universe was unfair to me in some way.
Yeah, I love that. I really love that. That's that's the best thing that my dad ever did in raising me was from right off the bat, you don't make excuses. Have proof of work. And I think he could teach me nothing else other than that, and he would have done his job as a father. Because so many people are just entitled for whatever reason. They think that they can ask for a raise without proof of work, and that concept is very clear to me. Even if I went into a corporate job, I think I would get raises pretty fast because I would know to track my proof of work and track this is how much value I provided to you. Can I have a little bit more value in exchange? It seems really simple.
Well, you mentioned before, you asked the question, how do you know you can't make 21 million any more than 21 million Bitcoin? Well, part of the mining is this thing called proof of work. You have to have done the effort in order to be able to submit guesses for whether or not you get the Bitcoin subsidy that comes to you. And so it's more complicated than this, but like proof of work is at the foundation of it. And one of the reasons that Bitcoin requires so much electricity is that you could skip this step, right? You could say, well, why don't we cut out the mining aspect and then we could have Bitcoin without all the energy use. But the energy use is what proves that the system is solid. It's what's required in order for you to be able to participate in the mining system. And by participating in it, it requires energy. And so this is like one of those key features where if people are like, well, I would like Bitcoin except for its energy use. Well, the energy use is a foundational key part of the proof of work, which is what makes Bitcoin valuable.
Yeah, that would take some more time for me to wrap my brain around, but it makes a little bit more sense. Yeah.
Do people in your age group, do they talk about Bitcoin? Are they into it?
People in my age group, probably no. But like Benjamin's and the Perium group, yeah, sure, absolutely. But no, most people my age are just talking about a whole lot of nothing.
You really think so?
I really think so. Yeah, I do. It just depends on the circles that you're in. I think like when I think about people in my age group and the general population, I think about the people that got their 4-year degree in college and now they're starting their careers and as pushing spreadsheets and they're going to bars on weekends and drinking. Like that's what I think of as like the general population in my age group. I think that's true.
And are they excited about the future? Are they afraid of the future? What do you think?
They're not thinking about the future at all. So probably afraid of what they don't understand. But no, there's no thought. And it shows by their actions. It's like you're not doing anything to move yourself forward. But yet, yeah.
You mentioned Parium a couple of times. What is that?
Parium is so obviously Benjamin Anderson, who your audience is familiar with. He, myself, and our mutual friend Colton, we got together one day and we were all meeting in the room right next door. And Benjamin was like, yeah, all of my friends are in their 40s and adults with children. I don't really have like a good friend group around here. And Colton's like, yeah, I feel the same. And I'm like, yeah, I feel the same. I don't have anyone that's like trying to move forward in life with serious intention. So we're like, okay, well, let's each invite one other person that we think also fits this mold, and like come together and meet and see what happens. And so there's a couple extras in there, but we have 8 guys that we meet on a monthly basis, and we host. Now we've kind of developed into like hosting events for our friends that have talents and bringing as many people together as possible that also think like us. And when I say think like us, like entrepreneurial spirit, you don't necessarily have to be an entrepreneur, but you want agency over yourself and the people around you. You want to live a healthy life. You want good things to happen. And so but you're actually taking the actions to get there.
And you said you host events. What does that mean, host events?
So, we've been meeting for almost 2 years now, I want to say. It started out as we'll meet on a monthly basis, get together, let's talk about our challenges, how can we help each other? And it's slowly developed into, I have a friend who has a talent of some sort. So the first event that we ever hosted was a jazz event for our friend Alina, Randall's daughter. And we're like, well, Alina wants to sing. She loves to sing. She doesn't have an audience that could do that. We're 8 guys that I think we have some influence that we could each get 10 people to come to something and give her the audience to, sing in front of. Give her that experience that she's never had. And so we did that. And we're like, oh, this was freaking awesome. We just gave someone that we care about the opportunity to do what they want to do, right? Give agency over themselves, or give them a little taste of agency. And so now we're like, well, let's do that for more of our friends and continue to do so. And so that's what we're doing.
What other kinds of events have you done?
We've done a friend of mine. He's a comedian, stand-up comedian. And so we hosted an event where we brought 100 people out to have a night of stand-up. We had a few different comedians on, and then we gave him a 30-minute set to do his set in front of these 100 people, which is unheard of in the comedy world. If you think about the Joe Rogans and when he talks about it, he's like, you would go up and do 5-minute sets in front of 20 people, and you'd do that 1,000 times. And we kind of shortcutted that for him to try that. And yeah.
Yeah, and you guys did a movie event one time.
We did a movie event for Sean's brother, who's a actor in a film, and the director Michael, who's Sean's brother's friend. Brought 70 people out to like look at these short films and do.
And
a
everybody
Q&A.
wears like formal wear and stuff, right? Like,
That's
they dress up.
Yeah, that's my pushing of that very much so. Yeah.
I think it is amazing. Like, to me, the word agency is the right one, right? It's like all of a sudden waking up and realizing like, oh, wait a second, the world that we want, we can just create. And like, we don't have to wait for somebody else to create a club or a group or get everybody together. We can do it. And then as soon as you do it, all of a sudden everybody around you is like, I'm so glad somebody did this. Mm-hmm. But it wasn't somebody, it was you guys, and you put it together. If people like, if somebody was hearing this somewhere far away from St. Louis and they wanted to start their own Parium group, what have you learned in doing this?
In the beginning, it's going to take, find a couple other people that feel the same way you do about life. It's going to take, I think, starts off with rigid structure of like, otherwise it could be really easy to just fall out of that. So when I say rigid structure, I'm like, we decided, okay, the first Wednesday of each month we're going to meet. And we don't know what this is yet. We don't really have an idea, but let's just continue to meet and know that we're going to keep doing that. And then be very protective of like who you invite into that initial group.
Why do you say that?
Don't try to spread out too fast. It just the quality of thoughts and ideas will be diluted by the more people you bring in if you're not super careful. And I think like because we've kept our group tight knit and like the original 8 still, like we are protected in that sense. Like these ideas have not been diluted.
Do you sense that this will grow from what you guys are doing?
Definitely. We have our Parium, and then we have our Parium Expansio, which is like the extension group, right? And so now it's like, okay, we'll do a separate meeting each month, and every one of the 8, you guys invite 1 or 2 people that you think is also in this same frame of mind. And that feels really good to me because like our initial Parium group is protected still, but now let's see how we can spread this to other people and create agency, as much agency in the world as possible.
And what does Parium mean?
Equals. Latin for equals. Yeah.
And so that's what brought you guys together, this concept of being equals?
Yes. Equally minded in the sense of like what our goals are and who we want to be as men and what our values are. Yeah.
So, Jack, you've become like an important part of my business because you edit this podcast. I started another podcast called the Ag Tribes Report. You're putting clips out on that. Tell me about your business.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's my business is I'm a podcast producer, but on the go essentially. Like I can produce podcasts for obviously Sean Newman up in Canada. Like I do them remote, I do them locally, and basically what I do is I come in and I'm like, okay, you have a podcast, let's talk about it. Either you want to start a podcast or you have an existing one that you want to see grow. So I'll come in and I'll show you how we do that, like what it takes to do that, and that takes like the clips, putting these clips out. So that's in the marketing aspect of it. Like let's expand your audience, let's create a funnel of your audience. Well, I won't get into the weeds of that, but yeah, I grow your podcast, I edit it, I can produce it, and I'll distribute it. So, all you have to do is show up and talk, and I take care of all the rest. I think there's 1,000 different things that go into starting a podcast and running a podcast, and the less you have to worry about all of these extra things, the better.
It's amazing because right now you have like a business up and running, and it is like upward trajectory. But I met you, and you were selling like trinkets for like offices and stuff, like what you give away at booths and things. And I remember seeing your talent and being like, hey, want to come work with me? And you're like, no, I don't know exactly what I'm going to do, but it's something else. And now you have this like fully formed, very like easy to articulate, easy to understand what it is that you do and the value you create. It's been amazing to watch you grow this business.
Yeah, I appreciate you saying that. It's it's been eye-opening for sure. Like, yeah, I and it all started because I started my own podcast. Like I just went out and did something different than like the routine of what I thought I was supposed to be doing. And because of that, I failed at it a bunch of times. I learned all the problems that go into starting a podcast. Eventually I did well enough to where people are like, hey, can you show me how to start a podcast? I'm like, sorry, I don't have the time. Well, I'll pay you to show me how to start a podcast. I'm like, oh, okay, cool. So I think as soon as that clicked with me, I think I put my 2 weeks in like the next week at my job, and now here we are.
Yeah, I think maybe that is the secret of life, right? It's like trying something, and just like in anything, the earlier you try, the less you are risking, right? Mm-hmm. Like you're not the only person that you've got to make sure has a roof over their head and is eating is you. So a great time to take risk and grow. And man, it's been wild to see you be successful, and then your success has then brought me more success. Mm-hmm. Like, we started putting clips out, and I was very resistant to doing stuff on Instagram. I have, almost no interest in TikTok. And then you're like, yeah, but we should put this out there and see what happens. And we just had a clip last week get more than 500,000 views. Like, it was wild. Just like what would have been a conversation just on my podcast heard by the listeners now has been heard by 500,000 people, maybe more.
That's right. Yeah, that's exactly right.
What do you think of the world of Instagram and TikTok and this? Do you have to worry about yourself getting sucked into social media?
Not really. I think they're excellent tools if used appropriately. I don't as much. What I will say is, like, it's still there a little bit, but I don't really worry about it too much. It used to be that I had my feed. Let's say, take Instagram for example. I had my feed of people I was following, and then once I had gone through and seen everything that the people I was following are posting, it was done. And so what you could do there is, like, what I did is I muted everyone, which muting is like you don't unfollow them, but you don't have to see any of their stuff. I would mute them all, and then I would only follow things that were productive, maybe Alex Ramosey's or business owners or different concept, right? Tools that I would follow. And then Instagram implemented the infinite scroll, where it's like, okay, now that you've finished all the people that you're following, now we're going to start recommending you different things to watch. And so it doesn't end. And that was, like, really frustrating as a user that's trying to use it in a productive way, because now it's like, okay, now it's feeding me, someone getting their balls kicked in or whatever. Like, no, I think it's a really big problem for my generation. I think people spend 6-7 hours a day on there. But I'm pretty good at it.
I think you can get hooked on the dopamine of it. I'm flicking through here, and every once in a while I'm going to see something that makes me go like, oh, I'm so glad I saw that. Like, oh, that shows me some news I wanted to hear or some whatever. And like, I found, because it was in competition with my kids, I would come home from work, and on my drive home, I'd be like checking things out, seeing what's going on. And then you have to consciously be like, I'm putting this down, because it's like, it's supercharged life. It's not real life. It's like, what is the most interesting 20 seconds or whatever? And your kids require you to be there, because a lot of what they're doing isn't interesting, but like, you have to be present for it in order to be a real parent. And for me, I see that thing as like very much a drug that I have to be very careful about.
There's no doubt. I mean, the people that are creating these algorithms know to put in 3 boring clips first that they recognize that you are not going to be interested in, so that way when that good clip does come, it kicks even harder.
Oh, wow.
This is like calculated, and it is evidence of this being real.
Yeah, I was just reading on Reddit the other day about how a guy that worked for Mr.Beast said, hey, I had to leave there after a couple of months because I realized that they are sitting there using gambling psychology to grab the attention of your kids.
Yeah.
And my kids, I don't watch basically any TV. We watch a little bit of YouTube of like wilderness videos or gymnastics videos. But someday they're going to get on there. And now, knowing what I know about like how much psychology is putting in to grab the most valuable resource that any of us have, the most valuable thing that you own is your attention.
Yep.
And they're grabbing it, and they're using as much psychology as they possibly can. And to your point, they're even tuning the algorithms. This is a very scary thing.
What do you think about the idea of Mr.Beast? Because, like, for instance, he'll do like, I just built 100 wells in Africa. You think that, is it as simple as saying, is Mr.Beast a net negative or a net positive? Or
Yeah, I think Mr. Beast is a capitalist, and I think that just like, you could be mad at the guy that makes tires because he cuts down rubber trees in order to make tires. Well, he made a bunch of tires, but at the same time, like, is there a way to do it more sustainably? Is that the right way to do it? Was there slashing and burning done? And so you got to take the good with the bad.
Mm-hmm.
I think that he is very, very intelligent. And I think that anytime Mr. Beast, Elon Musk, Donald Trump, anybody that you see that is very, very intelligent, that has become a leader, I am always very wary of them, because like the greatest fear that I have in the whole world is about mobs and people that are able to gather attention, that are able to garner the will and the popular voice of people. Those are people that I'm always very suspicious of. Isn't probably the right word. It's like I never want to be pulled into their trance. And so I like to see Elon Musk kicking ass on freedom of speech just as much as the next guy, but I also I want no leader. So I'm always pushing myself back of that. And I think the same thing of Mr. Beast, like very intelligent. I got no problem with how he made money. Do whatever you got to do, but I'm going to be very wary of you, and I'm going to make sure my children are wary of you too.
And your fear of mobs came from your time in Kenya, is that correct?
It's where I saw it, yeah. And then, I had read a book called The True Believer, which is by a man named Eric Hoffer. My dad, before I left for the Peace Corps, was like, here, these are 10 books that I think you should read. Maybe it was more than that. But, I read them, and that book was explaining how is it that people get involved in mass movements. And the book was interesting, and I liked it. But then when I went to Kenya and I actually saw... I not only saw a mob, I saw a man stand up as a snake oil salesman and get all these people to give him money. And he was clearly selling vials of water. And I saw over and over again, I think not that they were a more primitive or simple culture, just a lot of the things that we use to dress up our own culture. And it's hard to see what's going on in your own culture. It's hard to, if you're a fish, to see water. I was able to see it there. And then I was like, whoa. This is going on in the core of human psychology everywhere, and I don't want this. And ultimately, when I came back, I started to formulate these very clear visions of just how bad a mob can be. And I think that now, in today's day and age, you not only have to worry about the mob that goes and burns somebody's house down or goes and burns down a street, but look what can be done with social media to make people that don't know each other, that don't even really know the cause of the other people, to flame up in mobs. And my visions of doom or of the apocalypse are almost always of human mobs.
Huh. That's I imagine that's behind the themes and the deeper meanings behind zombie movies and stuff. I bet, because that's interesting, because my greatest fear used to be zombies as well. But you're very calculated in trying to avoid the mobs, in a sense of what you put out on the internet, what you're putting out. It's I think about Christianity and I have a very surface level understanding of Rene Girard after you and I also talked about it. But that's what I think true Christianity is willingly confronting the mob.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the Rene Girard stuff. It was a fascinating insight, and I got to see it. I read this, or I did an audiobook the first time I ever really experienced him on my way to an FFA convention, so Future Farmers of America National Convention, and one of the national officers had invited me to come there to say, hey, we want to say thank you to your mentor. So there's a woman that I really respect. She got all the way up to being a national officer. You go in there, it's in the stadium that the Colts play in. So there's thousands of kids. Wow. They're showing lasers, and they've got loud music going, and everything's pumping, and they're putting the people that are the national officers up on the screen like they're superheroes, and kids are cheering, and they can imagine themselves maybe one day being on that stage. And so I was watching what Rene Girard talked about with this this temple to mimetic desire, this oh, these people all want whatever's on the stage. I want to be on that stage. And it really freaked me out. It was whoa. And then you start thinking about it as like, well, what is the answer to that? Rene Girard talks about it being Christianity, but even there, I'm very wary. I'm very, very wary of pastors. I
am too.
And so, part of that is me being inoculated with using the Catholic Church. Like the only real one is a priest that wears these vestments and a silly hat. Like I don't necessarily believe that, but like when I meet a person that says like, oh, I'm a minister, I'm a pastor, and I can help you divine the Word of God, this is a person that starts at a negative integer with me than at neutral when you're just a regular person. Because anybody that's saying, I always think like if you are going to say that you can interpret the Word of God, like you better be careful, because like one, you're reaching into the trunk line of like human animus and what is it that drives us, and to be like, and let me hook it into you and let me show you how this thing works is very, very scary for me. So I would say most of the time, if I meet somebody that's a minister, I'm probably not hostile, but I'm definitely like guarded. Yeah.
Yeah, totally. I'm the community that like I'm heavily involved in right now is very Christian centric, and like a lot of New Age Christians. I find myself being very frustrated with them, because to me it's like, you were one wrong person away from joining a cult as opposed to Christianity.
A mob, just in the exact same way, just somebody using these words and for people that are Christians that have had a good minister, that have been in a good church, like I got no fault for you there. I think there's this. Rene Girard says that Christianity is the only way out of the mob mentality, right? That all other faiths, all other ways of being can't do it, and that's what Christianity is about. And I think there's some validity there.
Why do you think that? Why do you think there's validity there? Like, what do you think he says?
So the genius concept that Girard divined out of Christianity was that if you think about some of those core messages about when Jesus was about to be crucified, right? And they show he's already just said, Peter, you're the rock. I'm going to build everything on you. And then when Peter gets challenged, right? Like, weren't you with them, like with Jesus? And he's like, no, I'm with the mob. I'm with the group of people that are yelling at him. I don't like him. And he does it 3 times. And that is the Bible saying, look, this pull can get anyone, even the rock that Jesus chose to build his church on is now being pulled into the mob. And really the idea that, the mob, they always need a scapegoat. They need somebody to say, that's the reason everything's gone wrong. Let's go kill it. And that Girard was saying, well, by Jesus being perfectly innocent and having no fault whatsoever, no sin, by him being killed, there's no way to escape that they chose the wrong scapegoat. But that the fact that God was willing to sacrifice this showed, I'll allow you to kill this perfectly innocent thing in order that you can understand that there doesn't need to be any more sacrifices. Those sacrifices don't work. The only one that ever works is the sacrifice that I gave, and now you can, understand this in a deeper way.
Okay, because Jesus was the first like mythical figure of the scapegoats that was perfect.
Yeah, because the scapegoats that they choose generally, like, they did something wrong, right? Like they did maybe not even something wrong to the mob, but they weren't blameless, right? They had something go on, right? You kill a leader that was good most of the time but not good, or you kill the woman that wasn't an adulteress but like didn't lead a perfect life. There's no ambiguity in the story of Jesus. He was according to the Christians, perfectly good, and you killed him. And it wasn't the killing him that made it all better. It was the fact that God still can forgive you after this, which allows for, we don't need to make any more sacrifices. Jesus told us not to be a part of the mob. Let he who is without sin cast the first stone. These are all stories. Many, many, many of Jesus' stories are about don't join the mob, be separate, be different. And I don't know enough of the other faiths to understand whether or not they have these messages in there, but that resonates very deeply with me. And I'm so reluctant of mobs that I don't join clubs very easily. Like I don't and when I run a group of people, my whole thing is about, I'm going to show you how to have agency, but it's not because we're going to now run a group that like tries to do something larger.
Yeah, that's I think most Christians like really maybe not most Christians, but most, what I see is like they misinterpret the Bible in that way of like they're missing all of those messages that I think the Bible was really trying to get across.
I think that Christianity is one of those things that it's your own culture. And so if you grew up in it, understanding some of the beauty of that message is really, really difficult. And it's why I think this guy that I've interviewed on the show several times, Yosha Bach, he's the one that I'm always like, if you want to watch one that'll melt your brain, it's Yosha Bach, because he, not just Christianity, even the stories of the Old Testament,
Abraham,
right? Yeah, like he goes through and talks about these things with a level of like objectivity, standing outside of the system and being able to explain it to you. So he talks about the Garden of Eden being a metaphor for childhood. And this, to me, I had heard that story, read that story hundreds of times, but it had never crossed my mind. And then once you think of it that way, you're like, oh my gosh, you are there to teach the children the names of the animals. They don't know good and evil. They don't know that they're naked. My kids right now have no concept of whether or not they're naked. But one day they will. And when they do, they're going to start to be able to understand actually the world outside of the garden is dangerous. There are people that can hurt you. You don't have clothes on. And you need to prepare your children to leave the garden. But that metaphor was taught to me in a totally different way. And so I think that that's not because somebody was doing something at fault. It's just that Christians are so deeply embedded into their own Christian culture that I think it's sometimes hard to pull those metaphors' real meaning out. Which is what a minister is supposed to be doing.
Right. And in any organized thing, there's along that way, there's going to be bad actors that turn it, definitely. That's like the Abraham and Isaac. I thought what Yosha Bach said about the Jesus sacrificing, or God sacrificing Jesus, like brought him to level playing field with man, right? Because at first it was like, how could this God ask someone to sacrifice their son? What I really like about the Abraham story, though, that like I see playing out today, of like, you take someone that's like willing to stand up in their company because there's a DEI incentive that they're morally against, right? The way that I see like the Abraham and Isaac story playing out often is like, you have to be willing to sacrifice your job, your ability to provide for your family. You're, willing to sacrifice Isaac for what is right, for what is like the truest, highest moral good in your eyes. And I think like if you look at it in the Bible in those terms, and like continue to look at it in these metaphors, you can actually really change your actions in real life in like a really profound way.
I agree wholeheartedly. I think that's a great observation, and one that like we don't really want to face. The one that strikes me is like Noah in the ark seems like this like absurd story. Like, oh, you're going to build a boat and you're going to put all the animals on it. Like, where are those animals going to come out? But what people are forgetting is like, no, if you believe that you are supposed to be doing something different, it doesn't matter if people mock you. It doesn't matter if it seems so outrageous. Like, you got to start building, and you got to start building before the rains are coming. And so to me, like as a father, that's got to make you say like, I know like the world seems like it's getting a little chaotic and I want to make these changes, but I don't want to upset somebody. I don't want my wife to think I'm going crazy. I don't want the world to be mocking me because I've made all these decisions that are not like what they are. And like, that's a hard lesson, but it's so well encoded into that story that if you get focused on, did he bring 2 sets of elephants, or, what did the monkeys eat? You're not gonna get there.
Right, totally. And the other interesting thing about the Noah story is like it emphasized quite a bit that he would walk with God, and that he would, walk with God. And like I was on a walk one day and I was listening to music and I took my headphones out and I'm like, you know what, let's just walk and be in silence for a little bit. And then it kind of clicked with me of like, he was prepared for that flooding, because he was, testing his conscience, and he was going through and like seeing, what is right, what is wrong, what is coming in the future.
It is so hard to take the headphones out, right? Like, it's so hard. And I heard a guy the other day referring to it as raw dogging. So like, this has typically been a term for sex without a condom, but now they're saying like people are so ubiquitously using, their headphones, or they always have something going on, that like, imagine going on a hike but you don't bring a podcast or music to listen to. You're just out there. And at first I was like, oh, that'd be easy. And then you're like, I mean, I used to hike that way before there were phones, but it would be hard now. Like you do want that dopamine hit of what's new, what's exciting, what are people talking about.
I'll be in social interactions now where like it's relatively common for people to be wearing headphones like while hanging out and like, you know, talking. And I'm like, holy crap, that is offensive.
One of the things that I learned to do because I sit down to do these legacy interviews is if I'm listening to something on my drive in, I don't put it on 1.5 or 2 times speed. Because when you do that and then you talk to people in regular life, now all of a sudden a person that's older that speaks a little bit slower, if you've been listening on 2 times speed and now you're talking to an older person, you're like, oh my gosh, come on. When the reality is like, why are you so impatient here? So it's all these things that are done to make things easier or better. They've got big downsides.
That's interesting. I think that's what's really cool about legacy interviews is like you have to say pole in a sense, right?
I mean, it's the most present that I get to be. We just posted a clip. You posted it that people are really giving the last guest I had about. She talked about teaching her kids to meditate and to be present, and people were like, "You don't have to teach kids to meditate. They are already present. They're inhaling as much of the world, and they just have a different perspective." But this gets me thinking like, I am so present during legacy interviews or during this conversation, and that is like the most amazing gift. And if there was one thing that I would love to share more with people is like, how can you have a conversation with another person so that like the world just falls away? And it's easy to think about these in terms of romantic relationships, but like having a conversation with your parents, having a conversation with a person that you met on the bus or some other on the plane or whatever that is, it is transformative if you can get there. And it just requires learning how to have conversations so you don't have to be nervous about asking the right next question.
Yeah, knowing what to say, right?
Yeah.
I think there's something that you told me a while ago of like when I was in the podcast world is like, a good podcaster has the faith that they're not trying to think of the next question. They have the faith that because they are so present, whatever is being said will lead naturally into the next part of the conversation.
Yes, I think that 100%. It's like if you're really sitting there with another person, don't worry about what to say next. Just try and listen. And that question just like appears in your hand and you just have it. And, you could say, well, Vance, that's just your talent or that's what you have. But I've talked with people about this and I'm like, just let go of coming up with another question. And once you let go, the next question just appears and the other person can feel it. They can feel if you weren't just sitting there being like, oh, I have this thing, I don't want to forget it, so I'm going to keep holding it in my mind as I pretend to listen to you, and it transforms the way they talk to you too.
That's interesting. So we were talking the other day, and like a thought that I have right now is that the need for therapists would go down significantly if people understood how to just have deeper conversations, because there's so much things like quick matching where you relate back to whatever the person's saying and you say your thing, right? I'm just thinking out loud right now as we're going of like, what is what's the benefit of the person that's also like making those conversations happen? There's probably something very therapeutic about it, not only for the person being listened to, but for the person that's also like contributing to that.
Yeah, I mean, it's like when you listen to music, if the music is just kind of on in the background and you're doing other stuff, or if you're listening to music that's great and that's the only thing you're doing, you hear so much more in the music. And it may be a song you've heard 1,000 times, but if you just stop doing anything else, not even take a walk, just I'm going to sit here and listen to music, which is not something, at least I do very often, there's so much more inside of that. And that's the exact same thing in conversation. If you really pay attention to what the other person is saying, you're hearing inflections, you're watching where they pause, you're like catching all this stuff that like they don't even know they're putting in there, but it makes that whole thing so much more interesting.
You're hearing all of the separate instruments playing, and then you kind of see how it all turns into the symphony.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That reminded me of we started a project that I've never talked about on this podcast or anything, which is you came to me and you're like, hey man, I think you ought to take a lot of these communications ideas you have and record them and put them out and see what people respond to. So we've been doing this now we've done 6 rounds of it.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know how many we've put out, but that's been a fun project to like try and distill what does it take to be like a good listener? What does it take to have good interactions with people? How do you describe that to people?
Yeah, ultimately, I think like in order to have deeper, more fulfilling, more profound conversations with people, it's little skills that you can pick up along the way. It's not something that's just intuitive. And so, we're building something out right now of like, okay, let's give you different scenarios that you have had, that you no doubt have had, of like, what do I say next in a conversation, or why does this conversation feel like it's not going anywhere, or it's like staying on surface level?
What do I do at a funeral?
What do I do at a funeral?
Yeah, how can I engage with people at like when I'm checking out in the supermarket in a better way?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so we're putting out different pieces like that, and so like the most effective one of like people that I've shown this these clips to, like the one that's most profound to most people is that I've talked to is quick matching, which is like if you are telling me that hey Jack, my grandma just died, I'm really upset about that. Quick matching is like, oh, my grandma died last month and I felt really bad about that too. And now it's like our conversation has come to a stop. It's come to a head. Like now next thing you're going to say.
Yeah, now it's just ping-ponging back instead of like finding out what was that experience like for you.
Right.
And we spend so much of our lives having ping-pong conversations where if somebody, instead of quick matching, says like, how was this morning, right? How are you experiencing this? Now all of a sudden somebody's like, well, let me tell you. And so much of the human experience requires somebody to ask you a question for you to be able to verbalize it, for you to be able to put it, this like cacophony of experiences and things that happen to you, and however it all is just a cloud of emotions. And then when you put it into words, you yourself understand it better. But if nobody asks you that question, you don't get to understand it.
There's no doubt about it. That's like using some of these tools, like conversation that I've had relatively recently, I got down to like asking a friend of mine whose mom is terminally ill, like, are you waiting for her to die? And like to get to that level, you have to recognize what quick matching is and like how to avoid that, and all of these different things that we're discussing. Like you can have serious impact on people when you take these tools in.
Well, I'm speaking of serious impact, and not to pump your tires too much, but like I would not have done this had you not been like, let's try and do this. And it's been really hard because these are ideas that like I just use them, and if I could share them with people, I would, but I don't, but to have to get them down into 60 seconds has been a real challenge, but also really pushed me to be much better at communicating these ideas.
Yeah, I think it's great that we're doing it this way. Like the 60 seconds, get like a piece of the clip, and it's like, okay, like we can expand from this later. But like let's start with recognizing what is that issue that I'm having.
So we started this without knowing where we're going. Where do you think this goes?
Yeah, I think we build out a course that's like, let's give people the freaking blueprint to this. Like we build something to where you learn from what you have to say about this, and now I go out into the world and like I have a healthier relationship with my wife. I can, talk to my friends on a deeper level. I can ask for raises, at my job, and like I have a more fulfilling career. Like I think we take this thing all the way to the top.
Well, I'm excited about it, and I'm so glad you prompted me to do it. It's one of those things that I definitely don't feel like I have time for, but when we get it out, like I'm like, oh, that's fantastic. Well, Jack, this has been fun for me to just sit down and talk with you. We're like, all right, what are we doing next? What's their work? But if people wanted to find out more about Noble Lore, your company, and get in touch with you, how would they do that?
Yeah, just talk to me on Instagram. That's my form of communication, and that's like my business card essentially. So it's Jack Milliken, Jack, Jack with a period, and then Milliken, Millikan.
All right, man. Well, thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me, Vance.